Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the PetYupp Podcast, where we delve into the exciting innovations and most inspiring founders in pet industry. I'm your host Harry, and today's episode is a special one. We are joined by someone who's blending science and passion to revolutionize how we understand pet aging. We are joined by Dr. Andria Beal, a marine biologist turned founder who's bringing cutting-edge science to our furry companions through her company EpiPaws. They're building DNA-based tools to help pet parents understand their pet's true age and make better health decisions. Their pet age test kit has been on the market for 2 years and has tripled its year-over-year revenue and secured partnerships with major pet nutrition brands like Hills. And this year, they're set to launch a new health monitoring test, continuing their mission to move pet care from reactive to proactive. It's gonna be as interesting as it sounds. Let's dive in. So, Andrea, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us on the podcast today. It's a pleasure having you here. How are you feeling?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to chat today.
Awesome. All right. So let's jump right in exploring your journey. Let's rewind a bit. Your journey started with dolphins and marine biology, right?
Yes.
How did that evolve into launching a biotech startup in the pet world? Like, what was that pivot point that made you think this needs to exist for pets?
During my PhD, I was studying epigenetics in sharks and dolphins. And I was trying to create tools for marine biologists to use in the field, really was my dream, to help them understand the populations, endangered populations to be more exact. Right. And so in doing that, I ended up creating an age estimation test for dolphins, the first one for dolphins.
Right.
And I just thought it was so cool that we could estimate age with a lot of accuracy from just a sample. For dolphins, we were doing it with a tissue sample because they do biopsy darting with dolphins, but we were working on doing a swab for sharks. And I started pitching all my colleagues that I could make age estimation tests for any animal if they wanted it. And that was where I had the idea, well, there's lots of dogs and cats coming out of shelters and no one's offering them an age estimation test. So I was like, I could totally make one. And that was where the spark and the idea came to start doing things for pets. With what I was doing. And it grew from there because I went to a commercializing research workshop at my university, and they kind of opened my eyes to the idea that the pet market is really big and I could completely make a company around epigenetics for pets. So that was where it all started.
That's awesome. That's such a cool evolution there. So for the folks who might be hearing the term for the first time, what exactly is epigenetics and how does DNA methylation help us understand, how old an animal really is?
Yeah, absolutely. So epigenetics means above genetics, if you break down the word, and that's literally what it is. It's these molecules and mechanisms that are interacting with the DNA, and a lot of it is working in how the DNA actually gets expressed. So how your genes actually work. In particular, we look at the molecule DNA methylation, although epigenetics actually as a field encompasses many different things. There's histones, there's small RNAs, but our focus is DNA methylation. And it's this little methyl group that attaches to the outside of the DNA. And depending where it is in that genome, it's either turning genes on and helping stabilize the expression of genes, or it could be turning a gene off. And so how this helps us with age, for instance, and how accurately it helps us estimate age is that at certain areas of the genome, it's either adding or subtracting in a very linear fashion so that we can make a linear regression to estimate age with a lot of accuracy. On the other hand, we'll talk more about this too. It can also help us with health because proper expression of our genes is really important. And when it's off, that's where diseases start. And so we can also use these markers as biomarkers for disease development or a health trajectory that isn't optimal.
Wow, that was that's some fascinating. That's really fascinating. The way you explained it. So how does this understanding of this whole area translate into practical applications for pet owners and veterinarians?
Yeah, so With our first test that we put out, we focused on chronological age and being able to estimate the birthday of a dog or cat. And this can be really helpful in understanding the proper care an animal should get, because as they age, we change the way we feed them. We might change the supplements we make sure they get. We might change the way they exercise and how often or what kind of exercise they get. And then, of course, there's pharmaceuticals that will come into play, and choosing how to treat certain age-related things that pop up. That's where it becomes most important, I see, is as an animal is aging and becoming a senior, and these age-related diseases that are at the moment feel inevitable to happen, how do we treat them when they do pop up? Because you might treat it differently in a very, very old animal versus an animal that's actually pretty young and has an issue early on. There's going to be different treatment patterns.
I imagine for rescues especially, this could be such a game changer, right? I mean, once someone finds out their dog isn't actually a puppy or maybe older than what they thought, right?
Yeah.
So how does that shape the way they care for them? Like, what do pet owners usually do differently once they know their pet's true age? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there are some things, I left one off. There's also behavior. So when we're talking about new adopted animals, this is where it can be important too. And this is on the younger side. The closer they are to a puppy, there's like a difference in how you would train behaviors. And I'm not an expert on behavior and training by any means. So I'm not so sure, but that's what I've been learning through this process, is that it becomes important then. And, I lost my train of thought where I was going at that.
Take your time.
What was the question on that?
I also forgot my question. Sorry. What do pet owners do differently once they know their pet's true age? Like, they may be thinking of something, right? But they may be doing something different that they shouldn't be, according to what according to what the age of that puppy or the dog actually is. So once they get to know the actual age, what changes do they make in the way they care for their pets, or maybe their routine, or
Yeah, so I think, and that's why I started with behavior there. So behavior and how you train behavior might change. The younger they are, usually the more food motivated they are, is what I've learned. And then you might change it as they get older. The other thing is how people feed. As an animal gets older, they need less calories, because metabolism might be slowing down.
Correct.
And other things as far as exercise and how they might be moving, they might be getting slower on that end too. So those are the major things I see people change. And then knowing how to do the
vaccinations treatment as well, how often they need to get vaccinated.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's another one.
To be considered. All right, let's talk about the pet age test kit now. So could you walk us through how it works and what sets it apart from the traditional methods of estimating a pet's age?
Yeah. So with the pet age test, it's a mouse swab based test. We just need a mouse swab of DNA. And so it looks like a traditional genetic testing kit, but we have something that will be different depending on which DNA kit you would get for genetics. A lot of them can do it with a dry swab. For us, we definitely have liquid preservative that we have the sample put into, and that's to make sure we get high quality DNA in the sample, because we want to preserve what's there with those markers that we're actually looking at, not just the DNA sequence. So someone would order a kit. It's an easy at-home kit. They get the kit at home. They swab their pet. They put it in the preservative. They ship it back to us. Once it arrives here and we check it into the lab, it typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to process. It's a pretty long, in-depth process. And we're actually working on ways to improve this. With DNA methylation, there's more steps than a genetic test. So I see some genetic test offerings being a little bit quicker than that nowadays. So we're working on innovation in the lab as well. And then once we get sequencing back, we analyze and do our model magic, and we come up with an age estimation. And it's not just an age estimation. It's actually a suggested birthday because that number
Ah.
correlates all the way down to a day on the calendar that could be the birthday.
Okay.
But we
That's
like to
interesting.
remind our
Right.
customers that it is science, it is biology, and it's not
Right.
going to be the exact birthday. There's some error around the estimates.
100%. All right.
So we tell our customers it's a good idea to, know it's within 12 months of the actual age.
Right, but
That's the
at least they
typical.
get to know something, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of just assuming and maybe they change their approach towards the way they used to care, right? So
Right.
what's the reaction been like from pet parents? Any stories that stand out where the test really changed someone's approach to the way they used to care?
Yeah, so I get a lot of I think what I'm really seeing from my customers is the immediate reaction more so. And we're starting to, as a company, we're starting to reach back out to customers to see that follow up and what's, how do you feel now that it's been a while and you've sat with this new information?
Right.
So we're still gaining that. We're early on that kind of information, but from initial reactions, I do see people, there's a range of use cases is what we're seeing. Cause like on one end, the first time so some of them make me cry actually. It's like, so it caught me off guard. I didn't think I would have this reaction, but somebody had a pet that was recently diagnosed with lymphoma, and it was end-stage lymphoma cancer.
Oh.
And they didn't know how old the pet was. And they wrote me this nice email when they got the result. They're like, oh my gosh, we are so appreciative of this test. We finally know how old she is, and she's much older than we thought, actually. So it makes us so happy that her life isn't being cut short, and she actually had a really full life. We were worried about that. And it was the first time I realized how emotional it could be to find out your pet's age. It didn't occur to me. And I've had a few since then like that. So
that feels so good, when your work is adding value to
Yes.
someone's life. That feels so grateful, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
And then I've had some that like they were pleasantly surprised that the pet was actually younger than they thought. And those are always nice because it's like, yes, we got more time with our pet. So I like those.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. So beyond just knowing your pet's age, what are the broader implications of this kind of testing? I know EpiPaws is looking ahead to early disease detection too. So, let's talk us through a bit of that.
Yeah. So with this technology, this is kind of an extension, this next test that we're going to put out soon. It's an extension of the current technology. So what we use to measure age and get really accurate age estimate, there's other markers across the genome that are also changing with age, and we can use them to estimate age, but they're highly influenced by the health of the animal. That's where we come up with this term biological age. And it's how old you seem internally. It's how quickly your cells are aging.
Right.
And so with this, what's exciting is that this is something we can change. So you could look internally really old because you've made bad choices and you smoke and drink all the time, let's say as a human. And then if you stop those activities and you do healthier things, you start exercising more, you lose some weight, you could see your biological age change and get better. And so the same can be with pets. And luckily for them, they don't have the option to smoke and drink. So they have a leg up on us, maybe some humans against some humans. But we do have a lot of room for improvement, I think, when it comes to the way we feed our pets. And so that's been part of our focus with this biological age research.
I think that's the only thing that we can control from our end, right? Like the other factors we can't really control, but feeding, what we are feeding our pets, that's, I think, the one thing that we have the most control on, right? So
yes, absolutely. So feeding and then also exercise. Right. And we can't forget that. And I think that'll be something we haven't dug into exercise as much yet in our markers, but I have a feeling that for people who are really active with their pets versus people who aren't, we're going to see a big difference. So to be continued there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, it really feels like, this could open up a whole new frontier in proactive health pet care. So, what's your vision for how something like this could become a normal part of how we take care of our animals? Like, how do you envision the integration of such technologies in routine pet healthcare, like in the coming years?
Yeah. So with measuring DNA methylation changes really quickly. It's one of the body's first line of defense in adapting it to a new environment. So my example I like to use is if you walk into a new room or you walk outside and the temperature is much different from the environment you were just in, that DNA methylation is going to change really rapidly and set up
Whoa.
your phenotype, your cells and your genes to
Right.
adapt to that, keep you in homeostasis, basically. And so the same is happening if you put something in. So you take food or you take a drug, your body has to accommodate that new thing. It has to deal with it. So with that, if you are trying to optimize anything or you're just curious how something affects your pet's health, this is going to be one of the fastest ways to find out how does it affect biology. It might be a little bit longer term to
Mhm.
really understand the health implications of it, but at
Right.
the surface level, we can at least quickly see, did it elicit a big change in DNA methylation? If so, what genes? Where did that happen? Because it starts to indicate what biological process it's actually affecting.
Right.
So for an everyday way to use this, if you're measuring DNA methylation regularly, you know the baseline for your animal. So that if you're curious I've heard so many things about this supplement, it makes them live forever. You go and you give them the supplement and then you see how it
Right.
changed and you're like, yeah, no, it's not going to make a big impact. You can tell
Right.
because nothing is really changing. So I think that is how this will really become an integral part of
Mm.
proactive care, is being able to know so quickly how does it actually affect the biology versus the way we do it now is people will use blood work. Blood work is super slow to reflect an actual health change. And when we're using, for instance, if we're using blood work to try and catch a disease, that
Mhm.
disease has already taken hold and manifested if we're seeing it and we're diagnosing a disease. With
Right.
DNA methylation, we're watching these markers and we're seeing health trajectories before anything has become a disease or a health issue.
Mm.
And so this is where we open up the possibility of keeping animals healthy longer and avoiding disease development in the first place, as well as better understanding what this individual pet, who is an individual and might have different needs from another pet, how can we best provide care for that individual pet? So that's how it'll get used. It needs to be regularly measured, and then it can
Mm.
help us
Right.
understand how anything affects the health of our pets.
That's insightful. That's so good to know all that. And I imagine building something like this innovative comes with a fair share of challenges for sure, right? So, what's been the hardest part for you, or in bringing this tech into the pet space?
One of the biggest challenges is that the sequencing aspect of what we do is expensive. So we've been creative to keep things moving quickly. It's relatively cheap to have samples or get the swabs because
Right.
the
Yeah.
swab setup, it's not that expensive. So
That's yeah. Right.
that's how it all started was, samples are precious. And as a scientist, that was my whole thing, is
Right.
just if you're in doubt, just get a sample. We can't go back and get samples, and longitudinal samples are so important, especially
Those are
for
your
DNA
your assets.
methylation.
Those are your assets, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you have to have those samples.
Right.
So that has been a challenge, is that we have a lot of samples. I've been really diligent. Just get the samples. We'll figure out how we sequence them later, but getting the money to do all the sequencing for all the research. So it's really a
Mm.
prioritization. So we have all the samples. And so right now, like for our new product, we want to do dogs and cats, just like we have for chronological age estimation. But we did have to make a choice. And so we had to prioritize dogs for this next test on just how much validation work we've been doing. And that came down to just who was interested and really wanted it. So our nutrition companies really wanted dog. So we're like, okay, let's go ahead forward with dog as fast as we can, and we'll catch up cat later. So we're just about the transition where we can start focusing on cat, which is exciting. So that way we'll have one for both.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. All right. I think it's now time to end this podcast. But just before that, I'm just curious, with DNA testing in pets, do you come across any ethical concerns or pushbacks? How do you navigate those conversations with pet parents or vets?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because we've seen so many things with like the whole 23andMe going on with genetics and who owns data. I say luckily on the pet side of things, pet owners recognize that offering samples for research and allowing that data to be used is the fastest way that we're going to make a difference for our pets. And so there hasn't been, when it comes to animals, there hasn't been a lot of there isn't any regulation really around this genetic data. And pet owners, they are really open to allowing
cooperative with that.
Yeah, they're really cooperative, and it's really great. And it's actually it's really nice. I have, from my research participants, they send me nice little letters, and they're so excited to contribute to research, and it's amazing.
Nice.
So,
and I think that's what your the citizen science program is kind of.
We have our citizen science program, and it's been easy to start and do, and that has what allowed us to go so fast and create this age estimation technology for our customers, and now be well on our way to being able to help them understand the health of their pet. So it's really nice that there's not a lot of, concerns and ethical concerns around that. We're just allowed to use this data to do good things. So
makes life a lot easier, right? When you, because that's your base, right? Getting the sample. That's where you start. Without, you cannot do anything, right?
Yep, exactly.
That's awesome. That's really great that the people are so cooperative with the research, right?
Right.
All right. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I got to learn a lot from you today. Thank you so much for breaking down the science in such an easy and accessible way, and for showing us how it can lead to better lives for our pets. Your story from marine biology to pioneering biotech for pets is such an inspiring example of following curiosity and turning deep research into real world impact. I know our listeners, especially those with rescues or senior pets, will walk away with so much to think about. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the PetYupp Podcast. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories from the pet world. Until next time, keep those tails wagging.